Hi Media Stormers, it's Helena here. We're back with part 3 of our live show that we recorded last month at London Podcast Festival.
Hey everyone! Welcome to Media Storm live at King's Place!
If you were there, you'll know that we looked back at 3 of the biggest news stories from 2023 and discussed if the media did a good job of covering them. Last week, we released our live chat about how the Titan submarine implosion was covered in the media, and before that, about how the Hugh Edwards BBC presenter scandal unfolded. Scroll back on our feed to have a listen if you haven't yet. This week, we're releasing our chat about the ongoing sexism row in Spanish football, after Luis Rubiales kissed football player Jenni Hermoso without her consent. If you don't remember the story, don't worry because we run through it. We recorded the show in September, the day that it was revealed that comedian Russell Brand had been accused of rape, sexual assaults and abuse. One of our guests, Times and Sunday Times journalist Manveen Rana, worked on that very story, and you'll hear it referenced in this episode.
I present the Stories of Our Times podcast for the Times and the Sunday Times, and I've been a journalist for far too long.
As well as Manveen, we were also joined on stage by the hilarious Athena Kugblenu.
I'm a stand-up comedian and comedy writer, and most of the TV shows I write for have been cancelled. So thank you, you're welcome.
Thank you so much to Manveen and Athena for joining us, and thank you to King's Place for hosting us. Now, we know for everyone it's been a really shocking and devastating week in the news, and next week for our series finale, we'll be diving into the themes arising from the atrocities we have seen unfold in Gaza. Themes of oppression, resistance, militancy, and terror. We're finalising that extensive investigation at the moment. In the meantime, here is our final instalment of our live show at London Podcast Festival, and we hope to see you there next year.
So the Spanish women's football team won the World Cup over the Lionesses. We will forgive them.
Unfortunately, the coverage didn't really focus on their victory so much as a sticky question of consent. Why? Because Spanish Football Federation President Luis Rubiales grabbed player Jenni Hermoso on camera and planted a kiss on her mouth. And I say kiss in inverted commas because we'll get onto it, but Hermoso said she didn't consent to this, she didn't like it, and she has since filed criminal complaints.
Now look, this furor has not died down for more than a fortnight now, and what's happened since? Spanish women have taken to the streets to protest not just this, but a long history of sexism in their country. Rubiales claimed to be the subject of a witch hunt. He was suspended by FIFA for 90 days. Hermoso and her teammates vowed not to play for their country again unless he resigned. Hermoso said she'd been put under continuous pressure to defend his actions. The Spanish Football Federation accused Hermoso of lying in a bizarre defense where they said that she lifted him off of his feet. Didn't see that. Rubiales' mother went on hunger strike. What a mummy's boy. And Rubiales has not directly apologized to Hermoso at any point. But finally, after 2 weeks of maintaining he'd done nothing wrong, he has resigned. And as of yesterday, he was given a restraining order.
So for us, this raised quite a lot of general, wider questions around how journalists should report on cases of contested consent. And a lot of it hinged on language. So it's described as a kissing row. It was frequently written that Rubiales had resigned because of a kiss. The reaction was like, how ridiculous, this was a 1-second kiss. Why should he resign? Why should there be criminal charges? But of course, Hermoso didn't see it as a kiss. She said she saw it as assault. So should we be calling it a kiss? Should we be calling it assault? Should we be calling it alleged assault? This is really interesting question for you, Manveen, right now, because you've just broken a story that some of you might have read about with Russell Brand having been accused of multiple counts of rape and sexual assault. And you know how tricky a topic it is for journalists to report on. I mean, what did you think of the language used in this? And more generally, how do you think we should be approaching questions of contested consent in our language as journalists?
I mean, it's just incredibly tricky. It always will be. The problem is that we have so many connotations with any of those words. We talk quite often about stealing a kiss, as if that, that's fine. And so when you sort of see it on this, you think, oh, well, it's just a cheeky thing. And the problem is that just confirms precisely his opinion, that of course, this is standard, this is normal. It's difficult, I think, for the journalists, though, because you can't call it out until the victim calls it out. And she immediately, there was a locker room chat that was recorded. She was like, she certainly didn't like it. Yeah. But, she just won. And, she wasn't sort of immediately calling it an assault. So I think it was quite hard for anybody else to. But clearly it just made everybody watching, like the world watching, just go, oh, my God, that's awful. And then very slowly we started to realize that this is a man who has a reputation. She isn't the first person to have complained about him. Other people had. They even tried to sue people who had complained about him, sort of suing the victim rather than doing something about the person who's accused.
And they is the Spanish Football Federation.
The Spanish Football Federation. The Spanish Football Federation also put out statements they claimed had come from her that she had nothing to do with. So it's really hard if you're in the media and you're trying to untangle this. You're seeing official statements from the Spanish Football Association telling you that she says it's fine. You're like, I can't impose my values on her and tell her this really isn't. That's just as bad. It's really difficult. Yeah. And we've just done the Russell Brand thing. Again, that was difficult for very different reasons. You're asking people to come out and talk about, again, this was the problem with the footballing thing too. Her career hinged on this. He's already tried to sue other footballers who've complained. If you think that this could be the crowning moment, this is the most glorious moment in your career, it could all be over because you've just sort of stated the obvious. That's incredibly hard. And this is a man who is so powerful. It took weeks for him to resign. And it looked like the entire Football Association was backing him through most of that fortnight, which was really bizarre. So it's really hard for people to talk, to speak out. And I think as a journalist, you have to be very conscious of that. We had women speaking out about Russell Brand. We have podcasts dropping right now. And it's just really hard. The lawyers came back to us with a statement late last night sort of saying, how are we supposed to answer this litany of questions that you've put to us when you've deliberately anonymized the women? I was like, well, obviously. This is a man who has a cult following of 6 million people. Well, obviously we're going to protect them. But they were like, how is he supposed to know who you're
which one
to?
he assaulted?
It was like, well, that doesn't help your case. But that's the difficulty that we're sort of dealing with. And there are always editorial questions around anonymizing people. But if you don't, it's really hard for people to talk about this stuff because as much as we think the world has changed post Me Too, it still impacts people's careers. It impacts people's families. It impacts so much of their lives. And it's really hard to expect people to speak out when quite often they're the ones who will face a backlash for doing it.
Yeah, and Rubiales was her employer. I think that was actually a word that wasn't used nearly enough in the coverage. This was her boss doing this.
I also think it was interesting about anonymizing people, not anonymizing people, is when women don't come forwards with their names, you get that kind of response. When they do come forwards with their names, people say, oh, they're just fame hungry, oh, they're just money hungry. It's like a victim of that kind of sexual assault harassment can never win. But I actually do think that the media has a huge problem with failing to use accurate language when it comes to this topic in particular. And actually, we spoke about this on our previous Media Storm episode about gender-based violence. And the media uses language like non-consensual sex and like underage women. Like when Epstein was, under fire for sex trafficking charges, so many mentions of underage women. I mean, call me crazy, but an underage woman doesn't exist. It's a child. But they're so scared about using the accurate language. And when they fail to use accurate language, they afford grace to these perpetrators. This saying kissing row or kiss, Luis Rubiales has resigned after a kiss. It's like, no, it's a non-consensual kiss. Can we even say that? Can we go that far? It's quite frustrating not being able to use accurate language. I mean, I saw a reporter on the street and it was filmed that she was groped. This was a couple of days ago. Yet all the reporting had to say allegedly groped. We're like, we saw it. We just saw it. I'm going crazy. That's how I feel. And talking about feeling like you're going crazy, I mean, Rubiales and his team tried to spin the narrative so hard that the kiss was consensual, even though we all saw what happened on video. Rubiales then had an hour-and-a-half interview with Piers Morgan, because obviously Piers Morgan is the authority on consent and sexism. I mean, excuse me while I gouge my eyes out. But in this interview, Rubiales, he draws on very popular myths about sexual harassment and sexual assault. He said, well, it can't have been harassment because there wasn't any desire in it. And that's a myth we see in the mainstream media all the time, that harassment and assault is about desire. It's not. It's about power and control. And
there was an amazing line where he said, I kissed her as I would kiss my daughters, and I thought, my God, somebody send round help.
Yeah.
Like that.
For real.
Do you need to know any more?
And I mean, do you think that the media were complicit in this public gaslighting of Jenni Hermoso and really of all of us that watched the video?
Yeah, so, I think we're all very media savvy here, so we know that the media play a part in upholding status quos in society that we don't like. And one of those things we don't like is patriarchy. And one of the ideas that exists within patriarchy is that men are entitled to our bodies. And if we do something, it's because we've inspired that behaviour. It's on us, or we haven't, but we should take it as a compliment. Okay. And even if we kind of know, well, that is wrong, it's in the ether. And so the ether, with regards to the way the newspapers talk about these things, is the language they use. So, for example, underage woman, non-consensual sex, which is rape, things like that. Well, they had sex, she didn't consent, but it was still sex. Yeah. That's what they're trying to insinuate, that this is just a bit of hanky-panky. She probably didn't realise what was happening. Maybe something was on in the background. More 24-hour news. I don't know. And you saw that play out with this reporting. Like, what I would say though is that the way Rubiales spoke and the way the Spanish FA behaved made it very hard for the media not to uphold these norms, because they were just reporting the shit he was saying, right? Like, they couldn't not unsay the things he said. What they could have done is critique it more and really uphold his position as an employer and stuff like that. But let's be very clear, okay? A kiss is an intimate thing, okay? If I kiss you on the lips, your fiance's in the front row. He could quite easily come up here and give me a smack and go, excuse me, love. Do you know what I mean? She's made her mind up, leave her alone. A kiss, when somebody kisses you on the lips, that is an intimate thing, okay? There should be no question that the word assault should have been used, okay? Even if it was alleged assault, there should be no question that he should have been told by his team, look, you know what, you got excited. I don't know why you got excited. Spain won the World Cup loads. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're quite good at football. She's like, this is not a big deal for you, but whatever. But for some reason, he was so invested in his own entitlement, and the Spanish FA was so invested in holding his entitlement, that they just went on this madness. So I think the media were in a difficult place because they were just reporting what they said, which was madness.
And just watching it again, I mean, it's not just that he kisses it. There's like a little pat at the end, as if, I mean, that just sums up exactly the whole patriarchy. I mean, it's awful. But in the days that followed, they sort of put out stuff saying, well, she'd given him permission. We watched it. She literally walks past and he grabs her.
And then
what point was the permission conversation?
You have to report on that.
You have to say he has put out a statement saying, without being able to say, we all saw it. When did that conversation happen? Was it beforehand?
So then what is this is supposed to be objective reporting, or you have to report on it. And that makes us at Media Storm really question, what is objectivity? Like, is objectivity really giving, equal weight to the statements, the legally backed statements, curated statements of the powers and authorities versus the lived experience, that first-hand experience? Is objectivity impartiality? Yeah, let's give the same amount of space to that as we do to that. We are legally bound, annoyingly, to put out all of the sort of legally backed statements, but we kind of leave it to people to figure out for themselves what they think happened. I'm assuming, because it seemed absurd that she had deliberately given him permission, when clearly in the statement straight after, in the locker room, she was sort of saying she didn't like that at all. But, I don't know. Perhaps they'd had a conversation beforehand. So it's really hard for us to judge it for them. But all we can do is put out the information that we have, including the terrible statements, and hope that people make up their own minds. I think something else we can do, though, is contextualise properly, because I think this was reported largely as an isolated incident. And while a lot of us can see what happened for ourselves, really there was a huge amount of the public that thought it was overblown and absolutely ridiculous to have the scale of response and the resignation because of a 1-second kiss. But the fact is, this wasn't about a 1-second kiss. This is a campaign by all players of that team to have a change of leadership and institutional change in the Spanish Football Federation. They have been calling out sexism, homophobia, excessive control and corruption. For decades, they've had multiple strikes, and the media only became interested in it because of a 1-second kiss. And so I think
that context was not reported.
No.
Like I didn't really know about the wider context of the Spanish football players, campaigns against this control and sexism and homophobia until quite a long time after this, this reporting had been out. I just don't think that was...
Can we do a little test here?
Yeah.
How many people in this room, give me a cheer if you knew that most of the first team refused to play in the World Cup because of the conditions they were training under? Give me a cheer if you knew. I mean, that's a really dip. I mean, this is, you listen to a podcast called Media Storm. Okay, you know your business. The World Cup is the pinnacle of your sport. It's the World Cup. Okay, the women's world, it's the biggest World Cup we've ever had. Okay, and you cannot condone the conditions you're working in so much to the point you don't want to achieve your dreams, right? And no one talks about it. But people, to be fair, it was spoken about throughout the whole tournament. People couldn't stop talking about it because they played so well, And I actually have a theory which is completely made up, and obviously take it out. But I think he kissed her because he was like, "You can't do anything about this. Look what you've done. You've campaigned, you've left the tournament, and you still won it. So we were right." And here's a kiss on the lips to prove it.
I mean, I don't think that's that wild a conspiracy, given the nature
look how he's
of
behaved.
assault is about power and control.
Yeah, look how he's behaved since he's been called out on it.
Well, we are the centre of conspiracy theories here. Manveen has been accused by Russell Brand's lawyers of being the conspiracy.
Yes, no, we are part of a conspiracy.
We are hitting our hour deadline, so do we have any thoughts from the audience about this story?
I just want to say, I think my reaction to it straight away was just how depressing it was. That they'd just gone out and did this amazing thing, as much as the Lionesses lost, and that was very upsetting, that this became the narrative straight afterwards. And I was really angry about it, to the point where I'd researched that she hadn't, because I'm in PR, so I do that bit. So I was going back and looking, she hadn't, from what I think I understand right, she didn't want any of this. This just kind of happened. She was being forced into making comments and stuff like that. It can be so easy sometimes just to just be like, oh, another thing that's just happened. But it's not a small thing. So I think it's getting that balance right of it's not entertainment, it's not news. This is a conversation that we do just become slightly desensitised to sometimes. So, yeah.
Thank you.
While undoubtedly he unequivocally overstepped the mark, if he had turned around and apologised, as opposed to saying it was consensual, would you have sacked him?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, I wish we had an example of that so we could know the answer. Unfortunately, the reaction to this is so often defensiveness. I mean, we encounter this as journalists all the time. If you are ever prying a story that implicates an institution or an individual, you are met with defensiveness. Media Storm has just broken this investigation into policing, which has statistical evidence of racially discriminatory recruitment practices. At the beginning, the police institutions, they tried to discredit our data. This is their data that we access through Freedom of Information. They said, yeah, this data is not valid. And then after 3 weeks of, continuously pushing it, analyzing it, bringing in experts, bringing in lived experience, they have not only admitted to the data, but they've actually called us in to review the data with them. And so the knee-jerk reaction you get is defensiveness. And that was the case here. And I really like to think that actually if the response was, oh my God, I'm shocked that I had that impact on a person, I'm horrified and I'm really sorry, that could be journalism at its best, because that might open a discussion about how we have a culture in which treating women's bodies in certain ways is very, very normalized. And it's common, and it doesn't take a bad person to cross those boundaries. And we need a cultural shift that takes everyone with it, that says, oh, I could be part of the problem and I'm going to come with you. And so to see someone say I have been part of the problem and I need to change could really be the momentum swing that we need. And I like to think that there is a scope for forgiveness. I mean, there has to be a scope for forgiveness. None of us are perfect. Unfortunately, I just can't think of any examples of that.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I was going to say that you had a bit of that around Me Too, where suddenly a lot of people came out and sort of said, oh, I'd never been aware of how people might respond to something I've done. And, you know, it felt like you were having an honest conversation. But most of the time, I'd say actually it's, you do get apologies, but I very rarely believe them. I think this was really interesting because it was this Spanish macho thing of I'm just going to say what I think and I'm never going to back down. We've gone the other way where I think we kind of know, and there are, you know, PR individuals across the industry who will tell you that the moment you're in a crisis, apologize because the news will stop following you. So a half-hearted apology comes out. The news sort of decides there's nowhere else to go with it and stops reporting it, and it's gone. And it's as simple as that. And I think actually good journalism should look at exactly that, should look at the context. You know, this was a man who, this wasn't the first time he'd been accused of wrongdoing. You know, there were corruption charges, there was particularly around sort of behaviour with females, there were allegations even from his own uncle. You know, there was clearly something going very wrong. The female team had just managed to get their manager sacked, who was a mate of his. You know, there was a lot going very badly wrong for that team, which is, again, I sort of think, you know, as an England supporter, I still think bravo them for winning. But, you know, if he had come out and issued an apology, I'm not sure that would have been reason to think, let him survive.
In this case, yeah.
In this case.
Definitely.
Yeah, just on that, we're not very thoroughly invested in the idea of learning moments, generally, where all of us, whether we're right or wrong about stuff. And I think the problem with learning moments is that it's really nice being right? And it's really nice being in front of someone who's wrong. And then when someone says, actually, I've learned a lot from this interaction and I'm going to address my behaviours, it's like, but I have so much more to say. And I think on the other side, people are learning moments really scary because then you have to think about all the other things that you didn't get caught doing, you know? But, you know, like, if this arc of moral justice that we're going to go through is going to take us to a better world, like, you have to go through learning moments and say, oh, it was wrong when we did X, it was wrong when we used to do Y, oh, it's terrible when we used to do Z, that was terrible, right? But until we get to those points, until we get to the idea of normalising being wrong and learning from that, I can't remember, I can't remember her name, there's a black right-wing commentator, Dominique Samuels, is it? Anyway, she's often used to write articles that are pretty distasteful, championing right-wing things. And now she's realised that what happens is the Daily Mail had a story actually came out last week. I think the Byline Times broke it. The Daily Mail get white writers to write heinous things, and then they put black faces on the top of the article. So basically, it's like sort of a black-faced article, and Dominique Samuels was asked to do something for Notting Hill Carnival, and she was like, well, I didn't write it. And they're like, it doesn't matter, here's some money, just put your face on it. And she was like, I don't agree with this. And she finally learned, oh my God, I'm being used. Okay. And then she said, I've learned from this, I think I'm going to think more about my presence in the media spaces. Everyone was actually not everyone, but generally, it was like, oh my God, this is a learning moment for you. You realised how you've been used, and you were hopefully going to change for the better, or maybe just think on your actions, and also how bad agents can give you platforms that you take because you want to benefit from the exposure, and you care about the exposure more than, you know, what is right. But we don't get that enough, those learning moments. So I don't know how to, I mean, maybe I could have some more public ones myself. I don't know.
It probably does involve for more forgiveness. Having more learning moments does probably involve having more forgiveness. And I think you raise a good point, because we don't necessarily express a very forgiving attitude all the time.
Thank you for listening. For our final investigation of the season, we'll be speaking to international resistance fighters and exploring the line between terrorists and freedom fighters. That'll be out on the 26th of October.
Follow Media Storm wherever you get your podcasts so that you can get access to new episodes as soon as they drop. If you like what you hear, share this episode with someone and leave us a 5-star rating and a review. It really helps more people discover the podcast, and our aim is to have as many people as possible hear these voices.
You can also follow us on social media at Mathilda Mal, at Helena Wadia, and follow the show via @MediaStormPod.